I will bring you out from the nations. I will gather you from all the lands and bring you back to your own soil. It seemed unthinkable. Never in human history had a nation, once destroyed and scattered, risen again. But it was foretold, and it came to pass. A people dispersed like dust across the world, persecuted and exiled for over 2,000 years, were brought back to their ancestral land. Israel was reborn, fulfilling a prophecy that had remained silent for centuries, the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. But listen closely, the vision isn't complete. Two of its three phases have already been fulfilled: the physical return of the people and the political resurrection of the nation. Yet one final stage remains, and when it arrives, it will shake the entire world. Because Israel is no ordinary country. It is God's prophetic timepiece. Every event, every conflict, every threat ticks us closer to the ultimate countdown. Stay with us until the end, because Israel's story, from beginning to end, is written in the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, and that ending may be closer than you think. Ezekiel, the prophet of the exile. To understand the mystery of this vision, we must travel back over 2,500 years to a time when Israel was no longer a sovereign nation. It had been conquered, divided, and its people exiled. The 10 northern tribes had fallen to Assyria over a century earlier. Now, only Judah remained, fractured and frail. This was the era of Israel's final kings, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, rulers marked by corruption, idolatry, and the looming shadow of foreign empires. Though the temple still stood, it was no longer holy. Idols had defiled it. Justice had been replaced by greed. Then, in 597 BC, just as the prophet Jeremiah had warned, judgment arrived. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded Jerusalem for the second time. This time he spared the city, but carried thousands into exile. Nobles, artisans, soldiers, and a 25-year-old priest named Ezekiel. Born into a priestly lineage, Ezekiel was destined to serve in the temple, beginning his ministry at age 30 according to the law of Moses. But exile stole that future. Instead, he was taken to Tel Aviv, a community of exiles on the banks of the Kebar River in Babylon. There, far from the temple and seemingly distant from God, a displaced people struggled. Some clung to hope, believing the exile was temporary and Jerusalem would endure. Others surrendered to despair, embracing Babylonian life and letting go of the covenant. Israel hadn't just lost a war, it had lost its identity, its purpose, and its faith. Ezekiel stood at the crossroads of judgment and promise. Trained to be a priest, he now lived among a shattered people in a foreign land. And it was at the exact age of 30, when his priesthood should have begun, that God finally spoke. The heavens opened, a storm rolled in with 4 faces: man, lion, ox, and eagle. Their wings spread wide, their feet gleamed like polished bronze. Wheels within wheels moved beside them, covered with eyes, rotating without turning. It was a vision beyond description. Ezekiel realized what he was seeing: the glory of God departing from the temple, abandoning Jerusalem. And there, in a foreign land, God said, "Son of man, stand on your feet and I will speak to you." Overwhelmed, Ezekiel collapsed in fear. But God gave him a scroll and said, "Eat this scroll, then go and speak to the house of Israel." The scroll was filled with sorrow and lamentation. Yet, as Ezekiel consumed it, it tasted sweet like honey. From that moment on, he was no longer a priest in waiting. He was a prophet, a watchman standing among ruins, called to warn, to speak, even when no one would listen. God told him, "They won't listen to you because their hearts are hard." So Ezekiel would not just speak, he would act. Thus began one of the most unique prophetic ministries in the Bible. Ezekiel would preach through symbols and actions. God commanded him to lie on his side for 390 days, 1 day for each year of Israel's sin, then another 40 days for Judah. He ate measured rations, baked over dung, to symbolize the famine soon to strike Jerusalem. He shaved his head with a sword and divided the hair, each portion representing the fate awaiting his people. Ezekiel was commanded to take a sword and shave his head, a symbol of deep mourning and disgrace. He divided the hair into 3 parts. One portion he burned, another he cut with the sword, and the final third he scattered to the wind. This was a prophetic act, revealing what would happen to the people of Jerusalem. Some would perish by fire, others by the sword, and the rest would be exiled and dispersed among the nations. Then came the most heartbreaking command of all. God said to him, "The delight of your eyes will be taken from you, and you must not mourn." And so it happened. Ezekiel's beloved wife died, yet he was forbidden to grieve. Her death symbolized Jerusalem's collapse, sudden, devastating, and merciless. There would be no time to weep. Just as Ezekiel bore his loss in silence, so too would the people of Israel be struck numb by the calamity to come. Ezekiel lost everything: his home, his temple, and the woman he loved. But in that place of deepest sorrow, God gave him a vision, a revelation that would become one of the most astonishing prophecies ever recorded: the Valley of Dry Bones. It began when the hand of the Lord came upon him, and in the Spirit, Ezekiel was transported to a vast and desolate valley. It was silent, it was dry, but what made it truly haunting was what covered the ground: bones. Countless, scattered bones, bleached by sun, broken by time, forgotten by history. As he walked among them, the brittle crunch beneath his feet echoed the story. Then, God asked him a piercing question: "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel looked across the lifeless landscape. By all reason, the answer was no. But Ezekiel knew that logic had no place where the power of God was concerned. So he answered, "Sovereign Lord, only you know." Then the unthinkable happened. God told him to speak to the bones, to preach to the dead. Prophesy to these dry bones and say, "Hear the word of the Lord. I will breathe life into you. I will attach tendons to you, cover you with flesh, and clothe you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will live. Then you will know that I am the Lord." Absurd as it sounded, Ezekiel obeyed. He stood in the valley of death and began to prophesy. Suddenly the ground trembled. A faint rumble became a thunderous roar. Bones shifted. They rattled and rolled, moving toward each other, joining perfectly bone to bone. Spines, ribs, skulls, all assembled into full skeletons. Then tendons stretched over them, followed by muscle and flesh. Skin wrapped around each body. Before Ezekiel stood an army of complete human forms, but they were not alive. They had no breath. They remained motionless, bodies without spirit. Then came the second command: prophesy to the breath, speak to the wind. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live. Ezekiel obeyed. He called to the breath, to the ruach, the divine wind, the Spirit of God. And then, like the breath that once animated Adam in Eden, the Spirit descended. It swept through the valley, unseen but undeniable. One by one, the lifeless bodies drew breath. Chests rose, eyes opened, and what moments ago had been a valley of the dead became a standing, breathing army, a symbol of Israel's rebirth. A people once dead, now restored by the breath of God. This vision was so critical that God left no room for misunderstanding. He gave Ezekiel a direct explanation in 4 powerful verses. "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, 'Our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, we are cut off.' Therefore prophesy and say to them, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." These words unveil Israel's past, its present, and its future. Ezekiel was not just witnessing bones, he was witnessing a spiritual reality. The valley represented not only the exile, but a descent into spiritual death. And yet it also revealed the promise of resurrection, not only physical, but spiritual revival. Valleys are places of triumph. Mountain of Zion had descended into such a valley, a land of dust, silence, and despair. When Ezekiel stood in the valley of dry bones, he didn't see wounded soldiers or sleeping bodies. He saw a vision of national extinction, bones scattered across the earth, a people erased from history, no temple, no king, no homeland, not even a shared language. It was death on a collective scale. God called the nations into which Israel was scattered, graves. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people lived among these graves, exiled, wandering, enduring centuries of persecution, expulsions, ghettos, inquisitions, and finally, the horror of the Holocaust. God's question to Ezekiel, "Can these bones live?" was more than a test for the prophet. It was a challenge to Israel's hope. Because God often acts when all life seems gone, when nothing remains but dust. And yet, God's promise was clear. He would raise Israel from the dead. But the process would come in stages. First, the bones would tremble and reconnect. Then muscles and flesh would form. But still, no breath, no spirit. A body rebuilt, but not yet alive. This would be the first phase of Israel's restoration, a physical return before a spiritual revival. For nearly 2,000 years, this prophecy seemed impossible. In 70 AD, Roman legions stormed Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple, and burned the city to the ground. The Jewish people were scattered, first by Roman conquest, then by centuries of displacement across Europe, North Africa, Asia, and the Americas. They lived as strangers, stateless, templeless, often voiceless, holding on only to an ancient promise, because God had already foreseen it. Through Moses, he warned, "The Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and among those nations you will find no rest for the sole of your foot." Deuteronomy 28:64-65. Yet even in exile, Israel never vanished. They kept their language, they kept their faith, they kept their identity, and most of all, they kept their hope. Every year at Passover, no matter where they were scattered, they ended their meal with the same words, "Next year in Jerusalem." It sounded like a dream, but it was a prophetic yearning, a spark that kept the promise alive. Because the prophets had written long ago that one day the exiles would return, that the desolate land would bloom, that the forgotten name, Israel, would be spoken again among the nations. And then, in our time, it happened. On May 14, 1948, in a small room in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion declared to the world, "The State of Israel is born." For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, a nation that had ceased to exist sprang back to life. It was unprecedented in human history. A people who had been scattered like dust, reassembled on the soil of their ancestors. The bones began to connect. They came from over 100 nations, most never having seen Jerusalem. Yet they returned. The nation reformed. Many theologians, scholars, and believers see this event as the literal beginning of Ezekiel 37's fulfillment. Since then, Israel has been attacked, boycotted, and surrounded. But it still stands. And not only stands, it thrives. What was once a desert now exports technology, agriculture, water systems, intelligence, and defense. The Hebrew language, dead for centuries, is now spoken by millions. The very same language in which the prophets recorded the word of God. This is not just linguistic revival, it is resurrection. Proof that what was dead can live again. Isaiah's words ring true. The wilderness will blossom like the lily. Isaiah 35:1. But the prophecy of Ezekiel is not yet fully complete. The Lord showed the prophet three distinct stages of Israel's restoration. The gathering of bones, a physical return to the land. The formation of flesh and muscle, political and national reconstruction. The breath of God entering the bodies. A spiritual awakening, a recognition of their Messiah. Israel today stands at the threshold between the second and third stage. The nation has returned, the state is rebuilt, but the breath, the Ruach of God, has not yet fully entered. Why? Because the majority of the people still do not recognize the Messiah. Many live by tradition, some by secularism, others by ancient law. But the spiritual restoration Ezekiel foresaw is still waiting. Faith, others without it. But for Israel, something deeper still remains to be fulfilled. A promise whispered through the ages. Not just a return to the land, but an outpouring of the Spirit, a collective awakening, a transformation of the heart. At Pentecost, the Holy Spirit fell upon a small band of disciples in Jerusalem. That moment shook the world. But the prophets spoke of another Pentecost, one not reserved for the few, but poured out upon an entire nation. When that day comes, it will be like fire igniting dry bones across the land. A breath, a ruach, will blow again through Israel. A spark from heaven will become a wildfire of life. The Hebrew word ruach, used by Ezekiel, means more than just breath. It means spirit, wind, life force. It is the very breath of God Himself. This detail matters, because though Israel is physically restored, though the valley is no longer empty, the ruach has not yet descended. The bodies stand, the nation exists, but the Spirit has not yet entered. So the question remains, when will Israel breathe again? To find the answer, we must look beyond Ezekiel. For his vision was echoed by many prophets across centuries. Jeremiah saw it coming. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Jeremiah 31:33. Joel envisioned it as a great outpouring. I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Other described the moment Israel would finally recognize the one they had long rejected. I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look upon me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn. Zechariah 12:10. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul wrestled with this mystery. In Romans chapters 9 through 11, he laid out a divine strategy, one filled with hope, not abandonment. A partial hardening has happened to Israel until the full number of Gentiles has come in, and then all Israel will be saved. Romans 11:25-26. This is the final miracle. The breath of God will come not symbolically, but tangibly. Not to a remnant, but to a nation. A national awakening. A transformation that will shake history. And with that spiritual revival, the final phase of Ezekiel's vision will begin. The 144,000 sealed, a remnant for a sacred mission. This awakening leads directly to Revelation chapter 7, where we find a glimpse of Israel's prophetic role in the end times. As the last days unfold, marked by judgments, upheaval, and global crisis, God seals 144,000 servants from the 12 tribes of Israel. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of the children of Israel. Revelation 7:4. This is no random figure, 12,000 from each tribe. A perfect remnant, faithful, consecrated, chosen, not only to survive the tribulation, but to shine during it. They are not symbolic, but literal Israelites, sealed by God Himself, commissioned to carry the truth into the darkest moments of human history. As trumpets sound, seals break, and the earth reels under judgment, these 144,000 will stand firm. They will proclaim the gospel. They will testify to the Messiah, not just to Israel, but to all nations. This will be the clearest confirmation yet. God has not forgotten His people. He will not only restore them, He will use them. Because Israel was never meant to simply return to its land, it was meant to return to the heart of God, to fulfill its calling. A light to the nations. Isaiah 49:6. Jesus Himself gave a sign to watch for. Learn the lesson from the fig tree. When its branches become tender and its leaves sprout, you know that summer is near. Matthew 24:32. Israel is that fig tree. And its leaves began to sprout in 1948. That was the beginning of the prophetic clock. But the story doesn't end with Israel's return. Israel has become the center of the world's attention. Every war, every conflict around Jerusalem draws the eyes of nations. Why? Because what happens to Israel affects the entire world. Even this was foretold. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup that causes trembling to all the surrounding peoples. Zechariah 12:2. The vision of Ezekiel is still unfolding. The bones have come together. The valley is no longer silent, but the breath for Israel's restoration. But that restoration leads to one more final revelation. Because Ezekiel's vision doesn't end with revival, it ends with a war, a final war. The final war, Gog, Magog, and the last stand. A mysterious figure arises, Gog, prince of the land of Magog, leading a powerful coalition of nations in a final assault. But this isn't an attack on ancient Israel. It's a strike against restored Israel, a nation dwelling securely in its own land without walls or fortifications. Ezekiel gives us the names, and they're not symbolic. They're nations we know today: Persia, now called Iran; Cush, modern Sudan; Put, present-day Libya; Gomer and Togarmah, regions of modern-day Turkey. These nations, north, south, and east, converge toward one singular target: Jerusalem. But this is not mere geopolitics. This is a divine appointment. I will put hooks in your jaws and bring you out against my land so the nations may know me. Ezekiel 38:4-16. God himself will draw them in. This invasion isn't accidental. It's strategic judgment. The purpose? So that all nations will witness the power and holiness of God. As Gog and his allies close in, Ezekiel paints a dramatic scene. A massive earthquake shakes the land. Mountains collapse, soldiers panic and turn on each other. And then, fire and brimstone rain from the heavens. Israel won't fight, God will. I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and make myself known in the sight of many nations. Ezekiel 38:23. But Ezekiel wasn't the only prophet to see this war. Zechariah saw it too. From another angle, all nations will gather against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, houses looted, the people exiled. But at that moment, the Lord will go out and fight, as he did in days of old. Zechariah 14. And it goes further. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Whose feet? The Messiah's, the very one who was pierced, rejected, and crucified, now returning as king. 6 centuries after Ezekiel, the Apostle John echoed the same vision in Revelation 20. Once again, Gog and Magog rise. The nations rebel and surround the camp of the saints, but there will be no battle. Fire came down from heaven and consumed them. Because this final war ends the same way it begins, by the hand of God. God's plan has not changed from beginning to end. Israel remains at center stage. Because Israel is more than land, it's the platform of prophecy, the stage on which God's redemptive plan began, and the place where it will reach its climactic conclusion. Her scattering was prophesied. Her return was prophesied. Even her spiritual hardening and future awakening, all written in advance. And when the world gathers against Jerusalem one final time, God will respond. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. Zechariah 14:3. Because the city is another tick, another step, another warning. Jerusalem will be the final target, but it will also be the place of final redemption. The prophets agree. Ezekiel, Zechariah, Paul, Peter, John, they all point to the same conclusion. The Messiah will return to Israel. And when Israel became a nation in 1948, when Jerusalem became her capital again, the prophetic clock began ticking loudly. Not coincidence, prophecy. Look around. The return of the Jewish people to their land, fulfilled. The revival of Hebrew as a national language, fulfilled. The growing global tension over Jerusalem, fulfilled. Enemy alliances forming against Israel, happening right now. This is not coincidence. This is prophecy unfolding. The Bible is not just ancient literature. It's a map, a clock, a warning, and a promise. The breath still to come, and yet, the breath still hasn't come. The Ruach, the Spirit of God, has not yet filled the hearts of Israel. That will be the final miracle, the ultimate awakening. And when it comes, it will spread like fire across the world. It will mark the beginning of the end, or perhaps the start of something new. The final question, which side of history will you be on? Now you've seen it, a vision written 2,600 years ago, fulfilled word for word. The pages are turning, the clock is ticking, and the end is near. The only question is, which side of history will you stand on? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if this message stirred something in you, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss how prophecy continues to align with today's headlines. And before you go, watch this next video. Is Israel still God's chosen people? It answers the question few dare to ask, and the truth may surprise you.